Happy Monday and welcome back to my guide to Pro Tools. Today might be a bit of a longer one. We're going to be looking at the I/O setup window. Now, what is the I/O setup window? If we look at any interface, it has I/O. Like we've talked about, I/O is ins and outs. This Scarlett 4i4, we have two mic inputs on the front, and on the back we've got two more line inputs, and then four line outputs, and we've got some MIDI I/O, which a lot of interfaces don't have, and then the connectivity to the computer, right? We're just going to be looking at the analog inputs right now, or I should say the audio inputs. So this has four inputs and four outputs, right? That is your analog I/O. Okay, if we look at the Apollo Twin here, we have two mic inputs that can also be line inputs. These are called combi jacks. And we have four line outputs. Then we have optical in, which if you're running on ADAT can be 8 more inputs. So this would be a total of 1, 2, 10 by 12. Okay, 10 by 12, 10 inputs, 8 outputs. Okay, if we look at the Prism Sound Titan, we have a lot more I/O. Where did you just go? Okay. We have four mic line inputs, four line inputs, 8 line outputs. Then we have ins and outs, digital ins and outs over coax and light pipe, which this would be SPDIF, which is 2 channels per, and ADAT, which is 8 channels per. We have word clock, which isn't audio. I said we would only talk about audio. Okay, so we're really looking at this side. Okay, so you can see that this gets, depending on your interface, you can have a lot of ins and a lot of outs, and they might be configurable if you're looking at something like the Lynx Audio Aurora. That's configurable up to 32 ins and 32 outs, I believe. So you can have tons of I/O. When you get to your computer, this is either set in stone like the 2i2. There's no configuration there. You're only dealing with 4x4, so why would you need to configure it, right? Some software will allow you to configure it more finely, but either way, once you've got that either preset in your interface or configured in your interface's software, if you go up to setup IO, you can see all of your inputs, all of your outputs, and then a few other things. Okay? My Apollo's already been set up, so we're just going to take a look at how I've got it set up. In this dialog, we're only going to be checking out these 3 tabs. I'll tell you what these do, but we're not really going to be looking at them in depth. So if we look at our inputs, we've got all our inputs here. I've already named them what I want, and they're already routed. You can mess with the routing over here. You could decide that you want them to come in on different inputs, but it can get nasty. You can run into a lot of issues doing that. So usually I will just rename them, and then you can handle any of the routing here on your input selection in each track. But it doesn't come looking like this at first. So I'm going to grab all of these. I'm just going to hit delete. I'm going to hit default. And this is what it will come up with at first. Okay, it's just named what Universal Audio named all these things. And you can go in and rename it. Just double click. And in this case, I have my HX Stomp here. So if I put HX Stomp, you can see here that this is a stereo input. But if I click this arrow, it has auto created the mono subpaths. And basically that means I can use this as a stereo input. My Helix is stereo, so that works. Or I can use it as 2 mono paths. Let's say I just wanted to get a mono sound, right? I wasn't using any stereo delays or reverbs, just 1 amp, and I just wanted to record that in mono. I could just use the HX Stomp left side of it. Okay, so that's inputs. And if we go to outputs, it's the same thing. I could delete these and do the same thing, but I don't want to. Here, for whatever reason, they're all only stereo. I don't have any of these assigned to go out mono. I don't have that need. Maybe at some point I will, but right now I do not. The third page, the bus page, has the most flexibility. And this is where we're really going to get into it a little more, and I'll show you guys what's going on here. The first thing that you'll see on this page are your physical outputs. This looks exactly the same as this, except you don't have this matrix. Okay, don't worry about those. We're going to completely ignore those. Okay, once we get down here, these are all my buses. Now, what is a bus? A bus is a way to internally route audio. It's not going out of your computer. It's not going through your interface at all. It's only going through Pro Tools so that you can group things together or multiply the signal. We'll get into that in next week's lesson, is how you would use buses and why you would use them in different ways. But right here, we see all the buses that I have set up. Now, this isn't how yours is going to look at first. So I'm going to, again, highlight all these, delete all the paths, and just hit default. Again, it's put in my analog buses, and then you can see it's just created buses 1 through 24. And again, these are stereo, but if I click on them, it has auto-created these mono subpaths. So I could use this as a stereo bus, or I could use it as a mono bus. Now, why would I want a stereo bus and a mono bus? Let's say that I'm grouping together all my drums. I want those in stereo. I don't want all my drums coming down the center. I want to group them through this bus and be able to put plugins on it, but I want it to be stereo. But let's say I am just sending a sidechain. I'm just sending my kick signal to a sidechain to duck my bass. I don't want to use up 2 channels for that. No one's ever going to hear a sidechain. So I can just send that mono. Or if I was grouping together my snares are all going to be going down the center. So I don't need that to be stereo. I can have that just be a mono bus. Okay, so at this point, you could rename these or you could create a new path. And this looks a lot like our new track dialog, right? So let's say I want to create one stereo. Again, you can use our shortcuts. Hold down Command and press left or right to go from mono to stereo. And I will name this drum bus. And I don't want to create my subpaths, okay? Click OK. Whatever track you had highlighted, when you hit new path, it will just put it right under that. So at this point, there you go. Okay, so it has created it. You can see it doesn't have this arrow. I have to use this as a stereo bus. If I wanted to create a mono path, I could just go here. Let's call this kick side chain mono. Boom, kick side chain. So once you go through all of that and you set up your buses exactly how you want, you can then export your settings and save them. That's where it is. If you want to find it on your computer, Documents, Pro Tools, IO settings. It already has some automatically that ship with Pro Tools, ship, download, whatever. And you can see here that I've created a few on my own. The benefit to this is that you can save your IO settings at your home or at your studio, and you can take them to whatever studio you're going to be working in. You can load up your IO settings and you can work with the buses that you're familiar with. Now, let me show you how that works. Again, you would save that here if you wanted to export. I do not want to export this. So if you go to import settings, it's exactly the same thing. Just find the one. I want this one. Well, first, actually, I should say, before I do that, I always delete the paths. So I know I'm not going to have what I imported plus whatever else. Pick this one. This is the one I use. Boom, all my buses are back exactly how I want them. Okay, you can see I've got a lot of stereo buses, I've got a few mono buses, and then I've got some with mono subpaths. Okay, now there's a very cool little tab right here that says apply this to all tabs. This can be really useful, especially if you've had someone come into your studio and you've had to change your IO a little bit, or let's say you open a session that was sent to you from another studio and it kind of messed with your IO, which does happen sometimes. If I just click apply to all tabs, so here we can see that these are the changes I made, right? It's all just the universal audio naming convention, and then we've got this HX stomp here. So I'm just going to go here again. I'm going to delete all these delete all these paths, just so you can see that it's happening on multiple pages. apply to all tabs, import settings. Okay, my buses are all back. And if I go to input, I have all the naming that I had done, and it looks exactly the way I want it to, with everything laid out just how I like it. And that's really all there is to the IO setup window. It seems intimidating when you first look at it, but it really just takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around. And once you do, it's really very clear and very quick how you can do this. And I do recommend, if you're in a situation where you're dealing with the same ins and outs all the time, that you would name those so that as you are choosing your ins, they're all named exactly what you want them to be, and it's really easy to set it up. And as you're going through sessions and you're finding that you're commonly using certain buses, go in and create those paths so that they're always available there to you. Integrate them into your template so that when you open a template, all the busing is already taken care of, all the routing has been decided, and you can just jump straight in and get to the music. Okay, so let's just take a look at these last 3 tabs. This one, mic preamps, is if you're using any Avid interfaces, any Avid IO boxes, the mic preamps can be controlled from within Pro Tools. And this is where you would set that up. If you're using hardware devices as inserts, any outboard compressors or outboard EQs, anything like that, you would set that up here, and you can set the delays here so that as you're listening back, it's all time aligned, there's no phasing. That's what you use these 3 tabs for. If you're looking to figure out how to use those 3 tabs, there's already some other videos on YouTube. By the time we get to it in this series, it may be a long time from now, so I recommend you go check out some other videos about people who use outboard gear. All right, so let's just take a look real fast how that shows up here. Our buses, again, I want to show you outputs. Okay, so let's just look at our output buses. You can see that here our stereo buses are all the way to the left, as are our mono buses. Here I have my sidechain buses that are all mono. If they have subpaths, those are shown with an indentation. You can pair up buses 1 and 2 as a stereo bus, or you can use them individually, and it shows those here indented. All that indentation means is that they're part of a subpath. It's not a big deal. And that's really all there is to the setup window. I hope it made sense. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.